transportation team, and today I'm going to be telling you all about firearms. In particular, we're going to be looking at the journey the firearm has taken from yesteryear, thousands, well not quite thousands, but a long, long time ago, all the way to the modern day. So, where does the firearm begin? Well, it begins in the 1100s, roughly, in China. Because it's over there that the alchemists of China pursued the elixir of immortal life. And as they were mixing these things together, they accidentally created gunpowder. But they weren't to waste something so useful, no. They realised the potential of this explosive material and they utilised it for all sorts of things. A lot of the time they used it for entertainment in their fireworks, they used it for signalling over great distances of lands and battlefields, but at some point, someone made a brilliant sort of conclusion that if you put gunpowder in a tube, and you put a stone in front of that gunpowder and you set fire to it, well, you're going to send that stone very fast towards someone you don't like. And thus, the gun was born. Now, these early firearms were very, very simple. They were, like I said, what we might refer to as like a hand cannon. A tube of iron, typically, although different cultures and places have variations. And then you would put your gunpowder down that tube of iron. You have a tiny hole at the rear of it, known as the touch hole, at the breech, you could call it. You're going to put some stones, not even pre-made musket balls, just stones in there. And then you're going to take a burning bit of rope and you're going to touch the back of the gun and woof, bang! You better hope that that noise is the gun going off and not exploding in your hands. It's a very dangerous weapon. It's not very reliable. It doesn't shoot very far. And these are some of the features that we need to improve when we improve our firearm. We want our gun to shoot further and more accurately. We want our gun to shoot faster. And we want our gun to be safer for us, the wielder, the user. So, if we keep those three pillars in mind, this is going to be an interesting story. Now, we're going to take a huge leap from the 1100s and 1300s all the way to the 1600s. And I will present to you the matchlock musket. Now, the matchlock muskets, such as this, would have been something that you may have found during the English Civil War, so sort of early 1600s. And it's one of the first guns, maybe even the Armouries and a few other things, but it's one of the first guns that it kind of really looks like a gun. Those earlier can cannons I was talking about really just look like sticks with metal on the end. They're quite strange. But if you want to see one of those, you can go just behind those cabinets there and you'll see them in our galleries. Now, the way the matchlock musket works is very straightforward. What we're going to do, bring the musket about. We're going to take, I've got some props to help. There we are. We're going to take some gunpowder and we're going to pour it down the barrel. We'll then take our musket ball, which is about the size of a Malteser, just made out of lead, so I wouldn't eat it. So we'll pop that down the barrel as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a bit of paper or a bit of cloth known as wadding and shove that down the barrel. And we're going to remove the scouring stick, reverse the scouring stick, and ram the charge home. Use your finger and your thumb, not your whole hand. So if you do this and it goes off, well, you'll be able to see through it. So remove the scouring stick. That's very important because you can leave it in there and you will skewer someone spectacularly. But you will be able to go get the stick back, and that's not a job you want, trust me. So you want to put it back where you found it, underneath the barrel, and it also is the only way you can reload your weapon, so it's very useful. And then we're going to bring the musket about. Now, whilst balancing in the left hand, we open up our pan. Now, the pan is this metal shelf you see on the side here. Into that pan, we will take some more gunpowder and pour it in. Sometimes it's a finer grain known as priming powder, and then we're going to close the pan cover. We're then going to take our match, and our match is literally a bit of rope. Dipped in a thing called saltpeter. It burns very slowly, like an incense stick. Okay? And we're going to take our match, which is already pre-lit. We're going to place it into our serpentine, which is this arm that we see here. And when we're ready to fire, we'll open up the pan cover, exposing the gunpowder, present the firearm, and pull the trigger. Now what's going to happen is that burning match touched the gunpowder in my hand. That burns through a small hole under the touch hole, which ignites the gunpowder in the breech of my firearm, which then goes BAM! And then you've got to do it all over again. You get one shot. That's all you get from all that effort, one single shot. So, this particular weapon, on paper, although it does change through to the user, you want to be around 1 shot a minute, give or take. That's what we're kind of expecting of our English Civil War musketeers, 1 shot in a minute. Effective range, they are not very effective at range. We're looking at 90 yards, according to our curators here. It's probably the most accurate range you're going to get out of a firearm like this. And safety for user, well, I don't think it takes a genius to work out that if you have a constantly burning bit of rope and gunpowder all around you, accidents do happen. It's not a very safe weapon. So how do we improve on those? Well, the next step forward for the British Army was this one here, or something very similar to it. You might refer to this colloquially as a brown vest, although this one is a long land pattern flintlock musket. And this was standard issue for the British infantrymen during sort of the late 1700s, early 1800s. And what has changed is how we ignite the firearm. So in terms of loading and operation, everything's very similar, but we have ourselves a paper cartridge. So inside this paper cartridge is gunpowder, at the bottom is your musket ball, and then what we'll do is we'll bite that off, spit that out, and we're going to pour the gunpowder down the barrel, and then with paper, which is going to act as your wadding and musket ball and all, we're literally going to shove the whole thing all down together. Once you've done that, remove the ramrod, they changed the name, don't know why, ram everything down, bring it back, and this time you're going to pull the hammer back to half cock, and you're going to put some gunpowder into your pan. You're going to close the pan cover, pull the weapon all the way to full cocked, and then when I pull the trigger, the ignition is going to be this bit of flint striking this tall bit of steel prison, and that is going to cause a spark. Hopefully. Let's see what we get today. So pull the trigger and, oh, actually we've got a spark. I'll tell you what, that is, you're lucky. I never had to they say gunpowder being unreliable. Right, let's try again. You're not so lucky. There we go. And is that spark that's going to burn from the touch hole, ignite the firearm and fire the weapon. So it operates very similarly to our matchlock here. But there are some improvements. For instance, the rate of fire of this weapon has gone up by a whopping 1 extra shot in a minute. So we're looking at 2 shots in a minute. But it doesn't sound like much, but we're really going places. This is progress. So 2 shots in a minute, and that's partly because we've got everything in one place. We're not taking different pouches and bits and bats. Effective range is still only about 90 yards. So still engaging at relatively close ranges, not very effective weapons at long distances. And then in terms of safety for the user, obviously much safer. Because we're only ever getting a source of ignition when we want it, i.e. when I pull that trigger. So I'm a lot less likely to blow myself up. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a few souls out there that managed to find a way, but it was much safer. Now the next weapon on our table is the P53, and that is going to be the first rifle that the British infantrymen or standard infantrymen got issued with. So the P53 comes out in 1853, and well, like I said, it's a rifle. So what's the difference? Yeah. To look at this, it looks very similar to these 2 previous firearms I've shown you. So what is the difference between a rifle, which is what I would call this, and a musket, which is what I would call rose? Well, the difference isn't on the outside, it's on the inside. So inside the barrel there is a spiraling groove, and that is known as your rifling. Now it's that spiraling groove that is designed to engage your round, cause it to spin upon exit, and stabilize it. So you can get much higher ranges and much better accuracy with a rifle than you can with a smooth bore musket. Now, interestingly, the technology of rifling has been around for a very long time. Even Henry VIII was dabbling with rifling. So why on earth did it take this long to give our standard infantrymen something so effective? Well, the challenge was that with rifling with these particular muzzle loaders, i.e. putting things down the barrel, the round has to be touching the rifling in order for it to spin. And that makes it very difficult to put a round down the barrel. Often you'd have to hammer or push it right down, and that lowers your rate of fire quite substantially. And as a line infantryman, you want a high rate of fire. You want to be putting as much lead towards the enemy so they break and run away as quickly as possible. So we didn't see it as a practical weapon for the standard infantryman. However, with the invention of a new round known as the Minier round, this conical shape changed everything. Because instead of having a regular musket ball that's round, you have this cone with a dimple in the base of it. Now what's going to happen is when I pull that trigger, the energy from my firearm is going to go into that dimple and cause the round to expand on exit. So I can make it smaller to go down. So I can keep a high rate of fire, I'll be able to drop it down the barrel nice and easy, but when it leaves the barrel, it's engaging the rifle, it gets the accuracy, and that is a massive game changer, because when we turn up to the Crimean War with these degrees, we are outraging our Russian enemies, and they're still using smoothbore a lot of the time, we're using rifles, and what does that mean? That means my effective range of this weapon is up to around 600 yards. It is a huge leap forward in terms of effectiveness for us, the British infantrymen. So the rate of fire is still only around 2 to 3 shots in a minute, but now we can shoot much further and much more accurately. Now the other thing that changed with the P53 is the ignition source. So down here we have ourselves a hammer, which is my hammer lock, percussion lock. And then here we have a nipple. Usually someone giggles when I say the word nipple. No, they have a nipple. Now the nipple is basically the entrance to the pan. But instead of the pan being a shelf on the outside of the gun, it is now an internal pan. This technology was invented by hunters, not by the military. And the reason they did that was because obviously when you fired your weapon with the pan, you get a flash on the outside, and that would often scare away fowl or birds. So actually duck hunters, I think, were the people behind this sort of particular technology. And what we're going to do now, instead of having that flint and that frism, we have a small percussion cap, which is, I don't actually have one. A small percussion cap, it's a little bit of brass, tiny thing. It's a bit like a cap gun, if you've had a cap gun as a kid. And you take that little brass cap and you place it on top of your nipple. So you'll load everything down the muzzle, like we've done previously, put the cap on, hammer comes back, pull the trigger, and that hammer's going to strike that cap. Now inside that cap is fulminate of mercury or mercury fulminate. You can never understand the difference. Fulminate of mercury, thank you very much. I always get that mixed up. So fulminate of mercury. Now that reacts under impact. So if you've got a football full of fulminate of mercury, you can roll it back and forth, you'll be relatively fine. Just don't try to score a goal. You're going to blow your leg clean off. So, yeah, that's inside the cap. That causes a small spark, ignites the breech. Voila. So, fantastic weapon. And a massive game changer for the British infantrymen. Now, obviously, nations around the world would also start utilising rifles. In fact, probably some of them used them before we did. But the next weapon that we're going to look at for the British infantrymen was this one here, your Martini Henry. Now, your Martini Henry comes in around the late 1800s, most famously utilised in the Zulu Wars, like Marshal Kane and all these boys. And this is the first breech-loading rifle that the British infantryman is gifted, or standard infantryman is gifted. And what does that mean? Well, no longer do I have to put things down the muzzle. I can now load everything from the rear, the breech. Now it's a lever action, so that means I'm going to pull this lever down, and my breech opens up. Now the next little innovation comes with my ammunition. No longer are we using paper cartridges, we're using brass cartridges. They're much more solid, you can load them and hold on to them much easier. And this particular one takes a .455 rifle round, it's a big one. And it does not have any sort of jacket over the lead tip either. It's a nasty old round. Now you're going to take that, you've got one round, you're going to slide it into the breech, you're going to close the lever, and you're going to pull the trigger. Bang, off goes the round. Open it up, spent casing comes out, you load another one, close it, and bang. Suddenly you can see that this is going to have a much higher rate of fire than the muzzle loaders that we previously had. And yeah.
Why would that protrusion at the end? Why is that there if you're not putting it down?
Very good question. So this is my cleaning rod. So the tip here, we've got a hole in the middle. What we're going to do is we're going to take an oil pot, and you're going to shove that through that hole. And then basically, the house will get clogged up. We're still using gunpowder, so it's sort of very dirty, explosive. We're going to ram that down, get that oil, put it in nice and clean, and remove it, and make it nice and sweet. Hopefully. Yes, that's what that's for. Just a good question. I asked that when I first listened. Cleaning purposes.
Did it have the same range as the...
Yeah, it actually increased. So we're looking at 800 yards, another 200 yards on top. And the reason that that's happened is because the cartridge is a lot more powerful, and you're able to, with brass cartridge as well, you're able to maintain the velocity a little bit better in the barrel. So off it goes. No, this thing was a brute of a gun. It was very effective. In the Zulu Wars especially, there was even accounts of this particular firearm shooting through 4 individuals in a single shot. So yeah, very, very nasty, very, very big caliber, really did have some stopping power. Unfortunately though, if you're going to send something that big and powerful that direction, the gun wants to go this direction, and what's in the way? Your shoulder. So this has quite a nasty recoil. After the Battle of Rorke's Drift, 2 days of solid fighting, which is quite exceptional, admittedly. Some of the soldiers have been reported to have bruises on their shoulders that bled all the way down to their hips. That's how much of a beating their shoulders took. So fantastic weapon, did us some serious service, but there were room for improvement. And that improvement would come in the form of this, the Lee Enfield Mark III. Now there was one particular firearm came before this, but Mark I, Mark II. But this is the more iconic of the Lee Enfields that we have in our handling collection. And this is what would take us through World War I and parts of World War II. This is a fantastic weapon. It's a bolt-action weapon, and so the operation is different from our lever action over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the firearm off safety, lift the bolt up, pull the bolt back. That exposes the breech and my magazine. So in there, I will have 10 rounds of 303. And I brought 5 out for you to have a look at here. So there you go, there's your 5 rounds of 303, all sat in the strip clip. So you as a soldier will be carrying these strip clips with your bandoliers, or bandoliers, and you're going to load like so. So whilst you have got an external magazine that you can remove, you only ever took it out for cleaning. You load it through the top. So you take your 5 rounds. Now, before I do anything further, these are inert rounds, they have been drilled through, we're perfectly safe. All my guns are deactivated, so there should not be any loud bangs. So we're going to take our thumb, place those rounds down into it, and of course, we can do that twice because it has a 10-round magazine capacity. Once that's done, just going to take it out. Good measure. We're going to hit the bolt, and the bolt is going to come forward, pick up that first round, and it's going to stop. Why does it stop? That seems really annoying. It's because what you're about to push against is the firing spring, basically, or the firing pin. So there's a little resistance there. So what you do is, of course, in actual reality, you push straight through it, you've chambered your round, the bolt goes down, your firing pin is exerting over here, so you know that it is ready to fire, and then you're going to present the firearm, pull the trigger, and bang, off you go. Bolt up, bolt back, next brass casing comes out, next round comes up, rinse and repeat. And if you know what you're doing, you get a fairly high rate of fire. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see if we can't get it. There we go. I couldn't hit a barn door if I did that, but you can get a very high rate of fire. And on average, the rate of fire we're looking at is around that sort of 15 shots in a minute, give or take. Although it is important to note that most soldiers who are trained with this weapon, they were doing much more higher rates. In fact, in World War I, there was incentive to get high rates of fire, because sometimes they give you a bit extra in your pay package if they saw that you were shooting a bit faster and a little bit more effectively. So, yeah.
The record is 38.
The record is 38, so there you go.
A minute, well, one start measures the guards. 38 rounds a minute, fall into the target at 400 yards.
Yeah. And when was that set? That was set.
That was set in 1912.
Yes, 1912. Not been beaten since. So often you'll see a lot of Americans on YouTube trying to do the mad minute, they call it, and I'm afraid, as nasty as they are at their guts, they still haven't quite come close to do it. Yeah, very impressive. Yeah, they did.
About that later, because it's true, but there are important characters. That report basically tells the Germans to explain failure.
Yeah. But so yeah, no, it's
True, but there's context.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing how effective they became with this particular firearm. So effective that we really didn't want to move away from it. But in World War II, we move over to the number 4 Enfield rifle, and then we do eventually move away from it and move towards this next weapon on my list, which is something that some of you might recognise. This is the SLR. So the SLR was utilised by British forces during wars such as the Troubles in Ireland and the Falkland Wars, and it is the first semi-automatic rifle on my table. So the difference is, with all these other firearms, you have to operate something mechanically, manually, to get a shot off. With this particular firearm, you have to simply cock the weapon once, and then every time you pull that trigger, until the magazine has emptied, the firearm will fire a round. Now the magazine is a 20-round magazine of 7.62 NATO, so that was standard issue, sort of standardised ammunition idea that NATO were bringing in to try and get all nations to use the same guns, the same ammo, so that no one had an unfair advantage over the other one. No one felt like they could maybe bully the other side. Most nations didn't really jump on board with that. We certainly didn't go all the way with it. But yeah, so that's the rounds it was utilising. Now this weapon is effective to about that sort of 800-yard mark, give or take. Rate of fire, because of its semi-automatic nature, can be as high as, on averages, as sort of 30 to 35 shots in a minute. Realistically, it will fire as quick as you pull that trigger. Yeah. So you can get very high rates of fire, although again, most British soldiers will be taking their time finding their marks, where their shots will need to be. Now the way that this works is really clever actually, because in order for the weapon to automatically fire, you don't pull that trigger, it has to recock itself without your assistance. So what they do is it's a kind of combination of taking some of the energy from the round, because like I said, if it wants to go that way, the thing comes back this way, and redirecting the pressurized gases that happen inside the barrel. Because when the round's chambered, you've got all this air in the barrel, and when you release that reaction, it's so fast that you can actually redirect some of that pressurized air to kind of shoot out the end of the barrel and back into the weapon to help bring that force back and recock the firearm. So it's a really clever idea. It's something we still utilise to this day in terms of like technology. So yeah, really sort of, I wouldn't say ahead of its game, but it was bringing us up to sort of standards that most of the nations were at the time. It also is one of the first firearms to utilise polymers in its furniture, so that meant that it was cheaper equipment to manufacture, but also it took a little bit of the weight out of the firearm. So whilst it still can be quite a robust firearm, quite a difficult firearm, a very long firearm, it could have been a lot worse if we carried on using wood like we had previously. There we are, so our SLR. And then the last firearm I want to talk to you about is the one that, not quite the one we're currently using, but near enough. And that is this firearm here. So this is our SA-80. So this is what the modern British infantrymen are going to be going into battle utilising. This particular one is the SA-80A2. Nowadays, most soldiers will be issued with an A3, which is a slightly updated version. I think the updates are really just sort of bringing it to light with particularly rails and other sort of technologies that help it be more modular with other firearms that are out there. But it's a very curious firearm because it's very different from traditional firearm designs. Now it's not unique, there are many other firearm manufacturers that have designed weapons like this, but what we're seeing here is what we call a bull-pup rifle. So the difference between this and a standard rifle is that all the working parts, or some of the working parts, a lot of the working parts, are placed into where the buttstock would be. This is quite a lot of dead space. And it makes the firearm overall much, much shorter, as you can see. However, and it's not an illusion, I promise you, the barrel length of both these firearms is relatively similar. Because what we've got to measure is from the top of our barrel all the way down to where our magazine sits. And you'll notice that on both firearms, if I bring the magazines up side by side, yeah, the SLR still got a slightly longer barrel, but more or less, it's not as dramatic as one might think. So it allows you to have the same muzzle velocities of a battle rifle, which is very important, but in a much smaller package, which is also very important, because we had started fighting a lot of urban environments, and we thought, for our British infantrymen, they're going to use smaller weapons, not long rifles, they're going to get stuck in buildings, stuck around corners, stuck in vehicles, so smaller, more compact, so it's going to be more effective. Now the irony, of course, is that we then went on to go and fight in big open deserts, but you can't predict what you're going to fight, you can only sort of go off the information that you have. Now the SA-80A1 did come with a few problems. So in terms of the firearm sort of operational sort of stats, as it were, semi-automatic and fully automatic, although most soldiers are instructed to use it on a semi-automatic basis. Fully auto, for those that don't know, just means that instead of having to pull the trigger each time I want a round to leave my gun, I can just hold it down and it will continuously fire. Rates of fire in fully automatic are quite high. I can't remember off the top of my head.
650 rounds.
There you go, 650 rounds in a minute. So yeah, they're very, very effective firearms. They come with a stick magazine of 5.56 NATO, and that's 32 rounds in the magazine. So those are kind of the statistics. But in terms of some of the problems that the A1 had, it wasn't made particularly well, if
it's fair to say. So some of the complaints the soldiers came back with after we gave them the A1, once they got over the initial shock of the changing and drill and sizes, was that first things first, the polymers they utilised on the original one were not particularly robust, and they had a tendency to sort of melt in the desert suns, as well as apparently a sort of report of certain mosquito sprays or anti-mosquito sprays were reacting badly with the plastic and causing it to bubble. So there were some problems with the polymers that they were utilising. One of the other problems was that the firing pin had a tendency to snap, and that's because they've been manufactured to be thin and light, but as a result they were quite weak, and unfortunately if a firing pin goes in your gun, apart from literally taking the thing apart and replacing it, you're in serious trouble. Another problem is that we get blockages. So when the firearm was firing, the brass casing would come out of the side here, but in the earlier A1 version, that brass casing had a tendency to either not extract properly or somehow fly back into the firearm rather than out to the firearm. So caused damages, caused stoppages. The other one that I read about as well was here. We have our magazine release catch. So that button is pressed, the magazine falls out. Yeah. They didn't have any guard on the magazine release catches, and so what was constantly happening with many soldiers was they would be walking about, and that button would simply press against the webbing, and the magazine would fall to the ground. And again, you don't want that happening in the middle of a firefight, really some serious trouble. So there were all these sort of niggling issues with it, but of course in those intense environments, very important issues. And luckily the British government and army listened to these complaints, and what they did was they went and took the firearm to Heckler & Koch, which is a very famous firearm manufacturer over in Germany. Good engineers, aren't they? You always rely on a German engineer. And they came with the gun back to us in the A2 version. And they improved the polymers, which is fantastic. They thickened the firing pin. But it was a little heavier, but they did manage to retain, basically put a big, essentially a shoulder or a shelf onto it, so it made it stronger, tried to keep it as light as possible, really, really clever. This crescent or moonlight sort of feature here, not only more ergonomic for actually cocking the weapon and pulling the weapon back, but it's actually designed for when the extraction comes out of the round, the rear of it will strike this and it will kick the thing clear of your gun. So there's very, very, very unlikely for it to fall back into the firearm and cause a stoppage. They of course put a little bit of metal here to stop you being able to push the magazine release down. So massively improved, and if I'm honest, I think most soldiers have a rather fond reputation of this weapon today, but a lot of the lads that had the A1s have very good stories. Yeah. But now we're moving on to the A3. And I don't know what we're going to move on to next. There are articles and talks of moving back to a more traditional style rifle, like the AR-15 systems that we see in America and other countries using at the moment. But I know the history of firearms, I don't know the future of them, that's not my job.
We've got to do what's basically a high-grade AR-15 based platform for Marines and special concentration about 4 months ago.
Oh, okay, there you go. He knows the future of firearms.
Well, no, the present of firearms.
Present of firearms.
It's only about 3 months ago, but it's only for those regiments.
Yeah, so very sort of bespoke. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
How does it compare with a Kalashnikov?
Pardon?
How does it compare with a Kalashnikov?
You know what? I have a soft spot for a Kalashnikov. This is, on paper, a much more, a better firearm. It's certainly more ergonomic. It certainly works better for the soldier. Smaller rounds, so you can carry more ammunition. So on paper, this is a much more high-tech piece of kit. However, you can't underestimate the brilliance of simple weapons. If you strip a Kalashnikov apart, you open it up, and it really is just a box of springs and wires. It's quite simple, but as simple as it is, it means that it is very robust and it's really reliable. So you're less likely to get damages and stoppages, whilst more complicated systems can get dirt and mud and cause problems. Yeah, do you want to talk about it?
Okay. Basically, what it comes down to, the SA-80, damn sight more accurate because it's got this sight unit on it. You can engage targets to about 600 yards with some chance of success, but it is high maintenance. You leave this lying around for a couple of days, take it to the desert, you really need to make sure you clean it in order to work. Okay, simple to use, not as accurate, leave it in the desert, come back in 3 days, pick it up, it will fire. Accuracy is a maintenance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Neil, by the way, one of our trustees here at the museum, so he's not just a random chap, he knows his stuff, it's lovely to see him here. Yeah, no, thank you. He saves me. But I will bring the talk to an end, so I've rattled on long enough. Now, this is what we call a handling session. So, whilst I have done a lot of talking and teaching, the real attraction of this is to get your hands on these weapons. So you can come up, hold them, and experience